Have you ever felt like God whispered something to your heart but left out the GPS coordinates? You know that feeling when everything inside you knows you're supposed to move, change direction, or step into something new, but you're standing there completely clueless about the how, when, or where. Well, grab your coffee and settle in because today we're diving into one of the most relatable stories in all of Scripture. We're talking about Abram and Sarai, a couple who heard God's voice calling them forward, but had to walk by faith when the roadmap was nowhere to be found. Picture this scenario. You're comfortable in your routine, surrounded by everything familiar, when suddenly God shows up with what feels like the vaguest instruction manual ever written. That's exactly what happened to Abram and Sarai around 4,000 years ago. And honestly, their story reads like a masterclass in trusting God when you can't see past your own front door. Let me paint the picture for you. Abram and Sarai were living in Haran, which was basically their version of a comfortable suburban life. They had family nearby, established routines, and probably that one coffee shop where everyone knew their order. Sarai was dealing with something that would have defined her entire identity back then. She couldn't have children. In their culture, a woman's worth was often measured by her ability to bear sons, so this wasn't just a personal disappointment. This was a daily reminder that she felt incomplete, that something fundamental was missing from her life. Then God shows up with an invitation that must have sounded absolutely wild. He tells Abram to pack up everything and head to a land that he'll show him later. Not a land with a specific address or even a general direction. Just trust me and start walking, and I'll let you know when you get there. Oh, and by the way, I'm going to make you the father of many nations. You know, that thing that seems impossible given your wife's situation and the fact that you're both getting up there in years. Can we pause here for a second? Because this is where the story gets beautifully messy and completely relatable. God doesn't hand them a detailed itinerary. He doesn't give them a timeline or a backup plan. He simply says, go and I'll show you. This is faith before clarity. This is promise before evidence. This is trusting that God's voice is enough even when everything else feels uncertain. So they pack up their entire lives, say goodbye to everything familiar, and start walking toward a promise they can't yet see. But here's what I love about this story. It doesn't pretend that faith is easy or that trusting God means everything goes smoothly. Because almost immediately after they arrive in this promised land, a famine hits. A famine. They were obedient, they followed God's voice, and now they're facing a crisis that threatens their very survival. This is where Abram's humanity shows up in full color. Faced with uncertainty and potential danger, he makes a choice rooted in fear rather than faith. He takes Sarai down to Egypt, but he's terrified that the Egyptians will kill him to take his beautiful wife. So he comes up with what he thinks is a clever plan. He tells everyone that Sarai is his sister. Technically true since she was his half-sister, but completely deceptive in its intent. And here's where it gets complicated for Sarai. She goes along with this plan, but think about what this meant for her. She's taken into Pharaoh's house, probably thinking she's about to become part of his harem, all because her husband chose self-preservation over protection. She's sitting in a foreign palace surrounded by luxury she never asked for, wondering if this is how God's promise gets fulfilled. Talk about a plot twist nobody saw coming. But here's the beautiful thing about God's character that shows up even in our messy moments. Even when fear shapes our choices and we make decisions that compromise his plan, his faithfulness doesn't waver. God intervenes. He brings plagues upon Pharaoh's house, and suddenly, everyone realizes that Sarai isn't just anyone. She belongs to someone God is protecting. Pharaoh sends them away with more wealth than they came with, and they're back on track toward the promise. The journey continues, and we see Abram faced with another character-defining moment. His nephew Lot is traveling with them, and their respective households are growing so large that conflict breaks out between their servants. There isn't enough land for everyone to thrive in the same area. Abram, who could have pulled rank as the elder and chosen the best land for himself, instead offers Lot first pick. He chooses peace over position, relationship over resources. Lot looks around and chooses what appears to be the better deal, the lush Jordan Valley that looks like paradise. But here's what's interesting. God waits until after this generous act to reaffirm his promise to Abram. It's as if God is saying, when you choose my ways over your own advantage, I'll show you just how much I have in store for you. He tells Abram to look in every direction and promises that all the land he can see will belong to his descendants forever. Meanwhile, Sarai is still waiting. She's watching her husband receive these incredible promises about descendants, and her body is still a daily reminder that this seems humanly impossible. She's walking by faith too, but her faith looks different. It looks like getting up every morning and trusting that God's timing isn't a mistake, even when everything in her culture tells her she's a failure. Then we get to Genesis 14, and suddenly Abram transforms from wandering nomad to warrior. Lot gets captured in a war between kings, and Abram doesn't hesitate. He takes his trained men and goes after the enemy army to rescue his nephew. This isn't just about family loyalty, this is faith in action. This is what it looks like when someone who's been learning to trust God steps up in the moment when action is required. But notice the contrast here. Abram can act decisively in a crisis, charge into battle, and rescue Lot from an entire army. Yet he still struggles to trust God's promise about descendants. Action faith and waiting faith are different muscles, and sometimes we're stronger in one area than another. Sarai, meanwhile, continues her quiet endurance, probably wondering if God's dramatic rescue of Lot means he sees her situation too. In Genesis 15, we get this beautiful, intimate moment between God and Abram. Abram finally voices what's been weighing on his heart. God, you keep talking about rewards and descendants, but I'm still childless. At this rate, my servant is going to inherit everything. It's such a human moment, this mix of faith and frustration, trust and doubt, all wrapped up together. God's response is breathtaking. He takes Abram outside and tells him to count the stars. Try to number them if you can. That's how many descendants you'll have. And here's the verse that changes everything. Abram believed the Lord, and it was credited to him as righteousness. His faith, even mixed with questions and uncertainty, was exactly what God was looking for. But think about Sarai in this moment. She's hearing this promise again, this incredible declaration about descendants as numerous as the stars, and her reality hasn't changed. She's still the woman who can't conceive. She's still waiting for God to do something impossible in her body. Her faith has to be even more radical than Abram's because she's the one who has to believe God can use her specifically when everything in her experience says otherwise. What I love about this story is how honest it is about the messiness of faith. These aren't perfect people following a perfect path to a perfect outcome. They're real humans with real fears, making real mistakes, but staying committed to a God whose promises are bigger than their circumstances. They show us that faith isn't about having everything figured out. It's about taking the next step, even when you can't see the whole staircase. This is such an important truth for us today. We live in a culture that wants certainty, that demands detailed plans and guaranteed outcomes. But God often asks us to move before we have all the information, to trust before we can see the result, to step forward into promises that feel too big for our current reality. Maybe you're in a season where God is asking you to leave something familiar, but you don't know exactly where you're going. Maybe you're holding on to a promise that feels impossible given your current circumstances. Maybe you're learning the difference between faith that acts and faith that waits, and you're discovering that both require tremendous trust. Abram and Sarai's story reminds us that God's timing isn't our timing, but it's always perfect. His plans aren't always comfortable, but they're always good. His promises might take longer than we expect, but they never fail. Sometimes the greatest act of faith is simply staying committed to God's voice when everything else feels uncertain. Their journey teaches us that faith isn't a destination, it's a way of walking. It's choosing trust over control day after day, step after step. It's believing that God's character is more reliable than our circumstances, that his love is more constant than our feelings, that his plans are bigger than our understanding. But their story doesn't end here, and neither does ours. Next time, we're going to see how Sarai's story becomes central to God's plan in ways she never expected. We're going to discover that God sees her, speaks to her personally, and has plans for her that go far beyond what anyone could have imagined. Because sometimes when we're focused on waiting for one promise, God is preparing to fulfill it, in a way that's more beautiful than we ever dreamed possible. So if you're in a season of waiting, of trusting without seeing, of following without a clear map, you're in good company. Keep walking, keep believing, keep trusting that the God who called you forward is the same God who will guide you home. I want to leave you with this thought. What if the very thing that feels like uncertainty in your life right now is actually an invitation to trust God in a deeper way? What if the unclear path ahead is exactly where God wants to meet you and show you more of who He is? Take some time this week to journal about where God might be asking you to trust Him without having all the details. Pray about those areas where you're tempted to take control instead of walking by faith. And remember, you serve a God who keeps His promises even when the timing looks different than you expected. Thanks for joining me today for another episode of Spilling the Word. If this encouraged you, make sure to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next in Abram and Sarai's incredible journey. Until next time, keep trusting, keep walking, and remember that God's best plans often begin with His most mysterious invitations.